Man, I had this whole introduction about Myanmar planned, and now I can't remember what it was. Because you guys had your Myanmar talk, and now I'm all confused. Something,
Slork.
Airline food, maybe? I forget now. Slork, the Slork was there. It was this whole thing.
What's the deal with the slork?
Yeah. The soup Slork.
Myanmar would be cool to talk about someday.
Mm-hmm.
They had that, I think it was under the Slork rule, where they moved the capital based on predictions by some sort of like fortune teller or something.
Yeah.
But did they make a whole new city or just move?
Yeah, in like the middle of nowhere.
That's
Nice.
a great move.
Nice.
That's all. That always works out well.
Yes.
Well, it gave us Mexico City, I guess, right? In the
Yeah,
end.
but that was on the site of
Yeah.
Tenochtitlan and
No, but I mean going back to Tenochtitlan. You know what I mean? I'm saying like they built that on a swamp. And what didn't
Right.
it sink like 3 times or something before the
before the Aztec.
some rumor about that? Yeah. So you never
I
know.
don't know. I guess Brasilia is an actual city,
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
but yeah, I mean DC is a good example of building a purpose-built capital.
A Masonic city.
Almost yes.
Sonic City.
Well, of course. I mean, it's completely full of stonework and monuments. You know,
Yeah.
it does seem like they built it just to advertise the art. Oh, you meant the other Masons,
Yeah.
the demonic ones.
Yes.
Yes.
Uh-huh. Welcome to The Empire Never Ended with Boris and Fritz and even Ray.
And even Ray.
Even Ray is here today. It's
Even
the,
Ray.
Yes.
it's the whole
I
gang.
found some time to show up.
Thank you. Finally.
Okay. No problem.
Jesus. Show up. Yeah, you show up for the ones where we watch a movie that you suggest.
Yeah.
I see. Awfully convenient for you.
Yeah. It's a third one in our trilogy of films about Ustashas in Yugoslavia.
Yeah, I'm
Made in the 80s.
How many more
film
can there be?
depictions.
I think this is it.
This might be, yeah.
I mean, this
We
is
might have
it at
missed one
least
or
for
two.
the show. We're pushing it with films that and shows that people can't watch unless they
Right.
speak Serbo-Croatian.
Yes.
But I think it's this one's particularly interesting. I mean, they all are in their own different ways. And I guess we've been kind of doing them chronologically, right? The first
Oh,
series
you're
we
right.
did's from the early 80s. The second one a few episodes ago was 85, and this
Yes.
one is 88.
And things are
Yes.
looking worse and worse for old Yugoslavia.
Yeah.
First one was 83. It was also interestingly, that was TV Zagreb production.
Yep.
Then 85 was the next one that was produced by Sarajevo Television,
Sarajevo,
and
right.
that now
Yeah.
and now 88 by Belgrade Television.
Ayo.
The first ones were shows. This is a TV movie or a movie. I think a movie. I think it was shown theatrically. But there is also a version of this that's much longer and is a TV show. But I decided let's not do that. There is a
You're a good
90
man.
minutes version.
Good
That's
man.
enough.
Because we appreciate that. As much as I enjoyed watching those other two, it was, a good 4-hour plus commitment.
Yeah.
I like watching
It
these
is,
movies and just, imagining what's going on. And definitely 90 minutes is a good cutoff for my imagination.
It is. Yes.
It gets weird after that and then nonsensical. Sensical?
Yes. So this one is called Braća po Materi. How would you even translate it into English?
Your mother's brother!
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maternal half brothers.
I guess so. Yeah.
That's the best way to do it. It's not brothers from another mother. It's brothers of the same mother.
I mean, all 3 shows that we reviewed, or 2 shows and 1 movie, were, as we said, made in the 80s, Yugoslavia. But there is a big political difference between the first 2 and now the third one. Because 88 is quite different than 83 or 85 in Yugoslavia. There were big political changes, and it's different and significant that this one was produced by Belgrade Television in 88. Because in 87 is when Slobodan Milosevic came to power in Serbia, the Socialist Republic of Serbia, one of the federal subjects of the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. And as we mentioned before, Yugoslavia had this kind of federal system where you had each republic had its own communist party, or later on League of Communists, and Milosevic first started as the leader of the League of Communists of Serbia, and this is how, through this system, through this bureaucratic system, he came into power, Serbia in 87, and later on founded his own socialist party when in 1990 multi-party system was created. In then still Yugoslavia, which the civil war started in 91. So this is really the end of it, and you can see the political differences from the first two shows and now this one. I think all three are like propaganda films. The first two have the same ideology, which is basically the Yugoslav state anti-fascism. And you can see it clearly in what kind of characters are represented in it and so on. And this one, it's quite subtle, but I think very much like a Serbian nationalist propaganda movie. And I would like to maybe later on we can talk more about why I think that, and how this, like how in a subtle way this is a pretty good and effective propaganda film.
Yeah, that's an interesting take on it. I mean, when I was watching it, noting the differences between the other two that we watched, the two series that we watched before this, because it is noticeably different. The tone of it in general is a lot more, how should we say it? Dark. I don't know.
It's very somber, very doomy.
Yeah, and it's especially compared to the last one that we did, the series. What do we end up calling it? Out in the Open, which has like a very, has a lot of action elements and a kind of triumphant, they take down this network of insurgents and terrorists, and ultimately the Yugoslav Secret Service is pulled a fast one on them and comes out triumphant, and in that sense it's quite entertaining to watch and enjoyable. This one was kind of enjoyable in a different way. It's not poorly made or acted. That's, as Ray mentioned, came out in 88 through Belgrade Television, and it's directed by Zdravko Šotra, who was a pretty established director at that point. Once again, kind of like the last series that we did, has a pretty good cast of relatively well-known very well-known actors, with some overlap actually from the last one. Although and some actors who are clearly very young and go on to become more famous in coming years after this was made.
American listeners would probably, it's most likely they would know Mira Furlan.
Yeah.
Who has a prominent role in this movie. They would know her from Babylon 5, right?
Yeah.
Very few of them would, but yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Well, I think some of our listeners might.
Who's the dude from, do you remember Dolly Bell, the younger looking guy?
Slavko Stimac.
Yes, yeah. I think I realized today that he's like the Balkan Freddie Highmore, the good doctor.
Oh, okay. Maybe.
It's got that youthful look, tousled hair, a little awkward.
Yeah.
I mean, Slavko Stimac was like a very famous child actor in Yugoslavia, and was like a pretty brilliant actor as a child.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
And he continued his career. I mean, he was in Kusturica's movies as well, which got a lot of play around the world. I think he was in Underground, right? Also Dolly Bell, but yeah, he was in a lot of his films. I mean, in general, actually, Mira Furlan's a pretty interesting person. Her biography's interesting. It's kind of
definitely
a well-known, let's say, like anti-nationalist figure in the arts, who was in Babylon 5 because she was basically forced to leave both Serbia and Croatia at the beginning of the war and moved to the United States.
She was like based in Zagreb, or basically like a Yugoslavian Croatian actor, very famous one, and then when the war started, moved to Belgrade, which didn't make her popular at all amongst Croatian nationalists who hated her, called her like a Chetnik, which is totally stupid and nonsensical. And then she left for the States.
Yeah, I think even at the time, she was still living in Zagreb. Her husband was from Belgrade, I think. And she was, doing the commute, driving, back and forth to act in both places. And then, that became impossible. And she died last year or 2 years ago.
Okay.
And it was a pretty big deal.
2021 in January. Yeah.
Yeah, right. I don't know if she died of COVID. I'm not sure. But yeah, she's probably
West Nile.
Oh, wow. Okay.
West Nile fever, yeah.
Wow. Did not catch that when I was reading her obituaries back when that happened. But she's probably at the point that this came out, the most famous actor like in the film. So, kind of as a brief summary of what the film is about, you get it from the very beginning. They set up this kind of dichotomy, right? It opens with a picture, it opens with a shot of the actor Slavko Stimac, who's playing the role of Veselin Cvjetkovic, and he's kind of in this sparse room. You don't know that it's a jail cell yet, but it turns out to be a jail cell. You find out very soon thereafter, and then it immediately cuts to another guy out in like the countryside somewhere, which we later discover is Austria, playing the actor Žarko Laušević playing the role of Braća Gavran, and kind of alternates between these two, and you immediately figure out that these are the two main characters, and that this is who the movie's about, right? These are probably these two brothers that the film is named after. Shortly thereafter, you get Gavran's narration coming onto the screen, and he says something, about like, I was so shocked of seeing you, my brother, and receiving this letter. He's reading a letter, even though we've never met before, blah, blah, blah. It's an important thing to him. And we quickly, like I said, discover that he's in Austria. And we get this by, some guys, his employers speaking German to him. And he's with a bunch of dogs, and then says he has to go out on a hunting trip with these dogs. So he's training dogs, something that becomes kind of important later on. And we also discover through his narration that the character Veselin is in prison for murder, for killing another person of his age. And he says, how much of brothers can we really be? I'm 40 and you're 20 and we've never met one another. And so you get that, this guy's abroad, he's significantly older, and this young guy has gotten himself into a considerable amount of trouble. Then there's a weird sex scene right after the credit sequence, which shows Gavran, the guy who's living in Austria, at like a strip club, and then him weirdly disinterested in the sex that he's having. Oh yeah, like he's just lying there, kind of staring off into distance. It's very weird because it's the only kind of scene like that really in the film, and it doesn't necessarily bring anything to the story other than that he's depressed and.
I guess.
His life sucks. I don't know. And that
I think that ties directly to the end of the film, to the lesson that he learned,
right
at the end. Yeah.
And so, he's living, they're both living kind of disreputable lives, right? The younger one's in prison for killing a classmate on prom night. And the other guy is in Austria. And he says something like, you'll have a hard time on your trial without a mother and father. So, okay, we established that he's now an orphan, that they're, both orphaned. But and a brother who kind of does disreputable work and identifies with the Croats, some would say the Ustashas, right? So then immediately from the get-go, we know that he's a political emigre, right?
Yeah. So the older brother is Croatian, and he's 20 years older than the other brother, younger brother, who has a Serbian father, so I guess he identifies as Serbian.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And share the same mother who is Croat. No, she's Catholic at least. I don't know what to make of the whole Veselin's whole kind of ruffian character. Mm-hmm. It's very odd, right? So the film immediately starts showing you you know that he's in prison, and then he is interrogated by an inspector, like a detective, who makes him reenact everything that happened on his prom night that led up to this murder. But it's very odd, and it's done in this kind of dreamlike way, where the inspector's being very harsh with him, and he's taking him and saying, okay, what happened here? And he's following his girlfriend
reenactment of
reenactment of the whole night, which is they're at prom, and he goes in with his girlfriend to the bathroom, and these like kind of jockey douchebag characters are like, oh, he's look at the gay guy going in the women's bathroom. The other guy's like, oh, he's not gay, he's just a illiterate villager, blah blah blah. And then they beat the shit out of him. He gets a knife and murders one of them.
Yeah, this is especially kind of dumb because there's this girl who's his friend, like his best friend in school, and then he's like beaten up and bleeding, and he tells her, if I had a knife, I would kill them. And then she goes to the kitchen and gets a knife for him.
Oh, God.
Yeah. She's like, why would you do that?
Because you're fucked up.
Yeah. So he kills the guy. And it's like, I mean, and it's not like totally not explained. Why would she do something like that? And I don't know.
And like,
women, am I right?
Yeah.
Which you don't really get the feeling from his character. Like, he's very subdued, like throughout the entire film.
Well, he is Slavko Štimec, who's like...
Yeah, that's the role that he almost always plays. But like, I don't know, they're trying to set him up, and later in the film you see him with like his crew of troublemakers, and they're just not, I don't know, it's not very convincing to me in some ways. Like, it's just like, this guy's like supposed to be a troublemaker ruffian. He's just like some quiet dude who kills a man.
I think they wanted to portray him as a tragic character who had like a rough life, lost his parents, was very poor, was then, brought up in an institution. I think this film also has like a kind of a subtle anti-communism to it.
Oh, absolutely.
So I think that's also part of it. The idea that he was raised in a state institution probably fucked him up.
Yeah. And so, now that all he has left in the world is this brother that he's never met. And you find out a little bit more about, their background when Veselin is talking to his lawyer. And his lawyer's like, look, you're getting all these cassette tapes. Another weird thing in this film is that they communicate with each other. The two brothers communicate with each other through like audio cassettes. And they're like recording letters to one another, which I feel like it was just kind of a lazy way. I don't know if this is because the film is based on a novel. I don't know if this is how it is in the novel, but to me, it just seemed like a kind of lazy storytelling technique.
Yeah.
To not have to
it's convenient to have narration like this.
Yeah.
But they always just narrate anyway. I mean, you know what I mean? They just they have a scene where he's writing and there's a voiceover. You can only do so at least this is like something that does happen. You speak into a recorder. There's a reason now why we hear his voice.
But his lawyer's like, look, you're getting these audio tapes, like these cassettes. You're not allowed to have them, but maybe we can convince the guards because you don't have a family and like, who is this guy to you anyway? And he's like, it's my brother. And then he drops the name of the film and he says, it's my maternal half brother.
Yeah.
His dad was a Croat, mine's a Serb. In the region where I'm from, Serb and Croat villages are right next to each other. Yeah. And the lawyer's then he doesn't visit you.
Yeah.
And
the region they are from is like the surroundings of Knin.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Which we find out in the next sequence. And basically the lawyer's just like, oh, he doesn't visit you because why? He's a political immigrant. Is he an Ustashas? And to which Veselin's like, I don't know, I've never met the guy.
Yeah.
And then the film takes us back in time to a period immediately before World War II, like in the 1930s. And we were introduced to the character of his mother, who, like we said, is played by the actor Mira Furlan. What did you make of that establishing sequence of the 1930s? So, like, it's some sort of village festival, no?
Yes, it is. But I mean, I think the whole thing is like almost a kind of a manifesto of the Serbian nationalist view of war in Croatia that will start 3 years later.
Yeah.
And they go back to the 30s, and so Mira Furlan, the mother, is like she's obviously like poor, doesn't have family, I think, and then she's offered help by some family, and then through her being bullied by some other villagers, we find out that she's being helped by Serbs and like also a family that has like a Serbian cup, like a Yugoslav cup, and then they bully her, and so the Croatians from that region hate her, and some of them, and bully her because of that. So that right away kind of establishes this, because unlike the other two movies that we watched, this one is specifically about Serbs and Croats and Serbs in Croatia and those relationships, and framing in some kind of ideological way. So I mean, it establishes that like these relations were very bad before the war started.
Yeah,
and that even like a Croat who has some relations with Serbs would be bullied by other Croats,
right?
Who are not necessarily portrayed as Ustashas; they're just Croats who hate her because she's being held by some Serbs.
And honestly, I was a little confused by that sequence at first. I had to go back and see if I missed something, because like I was kind of doing a few things while I was watching this in this particular sequence, and she's going through this village festival, and these she's getting spit on by like the locals, like they're very harsh to her, and they're calling her like a gendarme whore and all this other stuff. We'll cut all your hair off, and for a second I was like, wait, they just introduced this character, so they're telling us that her family has a cop in it. And I was like, did I miss where they showed that happening? But no, they just do it through the bullying.
I mean, I don't know how well we explain. So the story happens in Croatia around the town of Knin. So Knin in 91 became so after this 3 years after this movies was made, became the capital of the like Serbian rogue separatist state inside of Croatia, the Republic of Serbian Krajina. So this is, and it's interesting that this region, is where this happens, because unlike most areas of Croatia that were or are populated by Serbs, during Second World War, the surroundings of Knin had a very dominant but significant Chetnik movement. Like in most of the other areas, the partisan movement was much more dominant.
Yeah.
But here there was a lot of Chetniks, and that's later on, like when the war started in 91, from these areas where the first like paramilitary Red Berets people were recruited from,
right?
And so it had like this history and presence of Serbian nationalism. And in most other areas, Serbs were very pro-Yugoslav, and it's a bit different than the rest. And this is interesting because Chetniks don't appear in this film at all.
Yeah, they're mentioned, but they don't actually appear.
Yes.
And then of course, to cut things short, her character meets the guy who is to be Braća Gavdan's father, and he's also just kind of like, a poor guy from the village, basically from that surrounding area. They get married and then have a child, Braća, and then World War II rolls around. And the father gets enlisted into the Ustashas in a very also kind of unremarkable way. And I mean, that's probably what a lot of that recruitment looked like anyway.
Yeah. Like the two Ustashas in black Ustasha uniforms show up in the village, and they're like obviously kind of evil Ustashas, which is okay. I mean, that's
fair enough.
And like psychos and so on. And then they basically tell all of the Croatian villagers that they're recruiting for the Ustasha movement and that they should sign up, which they all do. Like at least the ones who are present in the scene become these kind of auxiliary Ustashas who wear like not black uniforms, but kind of some brown, but also with the Ustaša insignia. Mm-hmm. And they are shown these other people are the other Croats who joined the Ustašas in 41 are like, unlike the Ustašas in black uniforms, they're not shown as like evil, but they're or psychotic, but they're shown as like opportunistic people who do it because this is the new government and they will get some benefits from it. They will get they get some food and like some stuff from the Ustašas.
Yeah, and you can tell that like Dad's not particularly enthusiastic about doing this. He's given a pretty mundane job of manning a machine gun at the top of the church's bell tower, the highest point in the village. And it is from there that he kind of gets to see what the Ustašas are actually up to. And so, the black uniformed Ustašas are portrayed as like complete psychos, which we've talked about many times before.
They were.
This is, pretty not an inaccurate portrayal of these guys. They show them giving some speeches to the local villagers about how the Serbs are stealing their forests and grazing their cattle on their land, and there's not enough room here in these mountains for the both of us, basically. Yeah. And they're like, we have to settle this Orthodox problem once and for all. You see a little bit of involvement of the Catholic Church there, too, not so subtle way. And then we see them rounding up the villagers, Serbian villagers from the neighboring village, and executing them all. And like in a really, obviously horrible way, but, they trick them into coming there and they're like, sit down, we're just going to talk, everything's going to be fine. And then a bunch of guys come out, surround them with guns and tie them up. And then you get this sequence that's from the perspective of kind of Dad in the clock tower with Mira Furlan and the kid. They're all kind of there witnessing things happen. And, they're executing all these villagers and throwing them into ditches.
Yes. And like they execute them with I don't know, a hatchet or something.
Yeah.
And then so the Dad, the like new not enthusiastic Ustaša is seeing all of that from his tower, the church tower, and he's like he doesn't like what he sees, and he says something like I told them they should go to Serbia, like this wouldn't happen if they left, and he says poor people, like poor like I am, or something like this.
Yeah.
But he doesn't, that's like, he's like, what can you do? That kind of thing. So it is established that he's not like the actual Ustašas, but he's also like, well, that's what happens when Serbs live with Croats in Croatia or something like that.
Yeah, right.
Which I think is like kind of the ideology of the filmmakers. I think that's like, so the film doesn't have any Croatian anti-fascist character. Like all of them are either super motivated, chauvinistic Ustašas or people like the Dad character who go along with them.
Yeah.
And that even more, like that character even more confirms this, I would say, Serbian nationalist ideology, because it's like, even if you're a good guy, like a good Croat, in the end it's the same. Like, in this kind of society, when Serbs live with Croats in their state, this will happen.
Yeah, and Dad, like he, like you said, he says that line about they're poor folks just like me. They should have gone to Serbia, and then he kind of takes his hat off and looks like looks on like sadly, but is ultimately kind of indifferent to what's going on. And then we go back to the narration. The voiceover narration of Gavdan talking into his cassette and being like tape recorder and saying like, after this happened, there were obviously consequences. The Chetniks attacked us twice, and then like a large partisan division came.
Yeah.
And that's when, we discover that Dad dies, and it's done through this kind of, you see Dad firing the machine gun shells falling on the ground, and then, he runs off and gets killed.
And this is like also, so we mentioned how this area actually had a strong Chetnik presence, but they don't show up in the film, and they're, as you said, like they're mentioned a few times. I think this is also significant ideologically, because like the Chetniks there were, we mentioned that was like Momčilo Đujić, who had the Dinara Chetnik division. but they were also like heavily collaborationist and pro-fascist, and they were like completely integrated into the Italian fascist occupying system. They also had their own small concentration camps that people call like Little Jasenovac there. They would also kind of kill and torture local Serbs and such things. And this film only mentions like Chetniks in the context of them fighting against Ustashas.
Yeah.
So, I mean, implicitly it portrays them as this kind of anti-fascist, anti-Ustasha movement, like the good guys, like I would say.
Yeah. And subtly, and not so subtly actually. But yeah, I mean, you can tell, like you said, there's no anti-fascist Croat characters in the film, and that's very much, again, a product of when this was made, when, you know, a lot of other films that we talked about, even back in Arc 2, when we talked about partisan films, they have a very deliberate system of representation for characters, and, you know, are very careful to portray characters of different nationalities in certain ways, right? And this doesn't really happen in this film.
It breaks code.
It breaks code. I mean, it's not, you know.
If this movie had the same ideology as the previous two ones, for sure Chetniks would show up. They would be totally crazy like they were. They would kill and torture people. And you would have like Croatian partisan characters. And I mean, and these things would be used ideologically in this other kind of Yugoslav propaganda films that we watched from 83 and 85. But that would also be more true to how it was. Like,
right.
the Chetniks were that, and also the partisans were both Croats and Serbs, and many other like ethnicities. So, and this doesn't exist in this film.
No. And then, of course, with the death of the father, the mother's character again starts going through hard times. Eventually culminating with her meeting this partisan from the neighboring village, the Serb neighboring village, who, you know, also starts helping her out. And then they kind of get married again in this very anticlimactic way.
Yeah.
So she marries the first guy just on the basis of him, like, you know, being like, let's marry.
Yes.
There's no prolonged. There's no romance. It's just kind of, they get married and they have a kid.
Which is probably like realistic.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's not very cinematic, but
that's
more realistic. True. But it goes in general, like with this tone of the film, which is very kind of morose and kind of slow and weird. So even like the action scenes aren't particularly exciting. They happen. Things happen.
Yeah.
I guess in that sense, it's true to the way that somebody might narrate something in a letter.
Sure.
Again, not super cinematic. But yeah, she ends up marrying this partisan who's a Serb from the next village over, and then she starts having trouble integrating herself in that community a bit too. They show some like interesting things, which might also go to the kind of not so subtle anti-communism of the film.
Yeah.
So like, you know, her new partisan husband rejects the church and tradition, much to the dismay of, you know, the rest of his family. There's some interesting scenes in the church and for their Saints' Day, and, you know, he's kind of tossing all that aside and saying, I'm a communist, and the rest of his relatives are upset by this. And the character of the mother is not particularly, you know, she's learning how to cross herself in the Orthodox way from, you know, his relatives, but she doesn't seem particularly to care one way or the other. She's just kind of trying to live life.
I mean, she's portrayed as very religious, but she has this kind of more personal relationship with Mary, I would say.
Yes, very much so. My feeling about it when that stuff started happening, like when everybody's glowing in the church and Mary's glowing in the church and everybody's like in awe of it, I had this sneaking itchy feeling that this is how everybody sees Catholics, like that aren't Catholics. You know what I mean? Like it was a very magical, sort of almost, I don't know what I wanted to say, almost primitive kind of view of it, you know?
Yeah, I mean, the movie is very simplistic in how it approaches. Like, this is why I think it's like propaganda, because it's, you know, all of these things kind of symbolize, like, okay, these are the Catholics, these are the Croats, these are the Serbs. This is, so the new husband he's portrayed as this kind of very like good. He's a good man. He's a good-hearted Serbian guy, but he's also like a fool because he's a communist, and he's portrayed as being a fool. Like, so there is a priest Orthodox priest who tells him like, remember this, like no one who like kicked out a priest on their like patron saint from their house ever, whatever, had good luck in their life or something like this. Yeah. And this is like, and the film is on the priest's side. Like he's portrayed as someone who has some wisdom there, and the communist like is an idiot for doing that.
Yeah, and he has a very even like dopey look and mannerisms. You know, he's obviously a guy that's easily duped. And that's what spells the end of his character too. Yeah. Right.
But this is like also, so Mira Furlan had two husbands who were both like good guys, but the one who was Croat became an Ustaša who was like, oh, okay, well, I guess we need to kill these Serbs now. And the good Serbian guy was the anti-fascist communist guy.
Right. Who's a moron. And who's a moron who gets himself in trouble for being a communist, ultimately, that leads to his death. So, then we hear in the narration that, like, young Veselin is born, and then basically it's right after his birth that his dad kills himself. No, it's it's when they're celebrating his birth, and they name they're like, we named you Veselin because that means like happy, because we want happiness to be in this house. And then like as he's getting all the drinks ready and preparing to feast and celebrate the birth of his child, these a cop and like a local some local official show up at his door and inform him that he's going to have to go to prison because he took funds
from his job to buy a stove for his family and to paint the house inside like the walls. So he used job money for that, basically stole from his job. And then these people come and they say like, this is like you stole money, you'll go to jail now, and this is especially bad because you're a member of the Communist Party, so you're fucked. Like you'll lose your good standing as a communist. And then the dad, Veselin's dad, lies and says, "Okay, I actually have the money. Let me go get the money." And then he goes to get the money, and he doesn't show up for some time. And then they go to search him, and he hung himself. Like.
Yeah,
he's
hanging himself with the goats.
Yeah,
but that's while Veselin's brother is there visiting. Am I wrong? There was this guy that shows up in uniform. Yeah,
everything happens in a matter of minutes. Like so Braća, the older brother, shows up in his Yugoslav military uniform. Everyone's happy. It's great that you're here. We're gonna have a great time. Cops show up. Dad killed himself.
It's very quick order of events.
Yeah, and this also, I think, is the point is to show how the communist system is heartless, and this good naive man killed himself because of this rigid,
naive and honorable man.
Yeah, although he did steal. I mean, they don't deny that, but because he's poor.
But he was forced to because of the shitty communist system that impoverished him. Yeah.
Which, I mean, it's true, especially in the early years. The Yugoslavia had it was a Stalinist system. It was very harsh, and like lots of people who were like good people were fucked by the state and in many ways and so on. So it's like a lot of things, a lot of things they portray here are true. Like the Ustashas were total maniacs. The Stalinists were also pretty bad. Yeah, but like the way they use this thing selectively, is to portray this ideological thing they want to do.
Well, I guess you hit the point earlier, both of you, when you were talking about what was missing in the film more than what was there, right? So they put in things that are real, but they also didn't put in things that should be there. Yeah.
I mean, there are no like Croat anti-fascists. There are no Croat like whatever, like people who are not a part of the nationalist system, like Ustashas, like it just doesn't exist, and there are no Chetniks on the other side.
Yeah, and so then we also are told what happens, like to Braća's story. So he has a hard time growing up because his dad was an Ustaša. and so people mistreat him and whatever.
There's also an interesting kind of ideological scene is when he's, I think, shoveling snow, or I don't know what, he's doing something of that sort while in the army with another soldier, and then he says to the other soldier, my dad was an Ustasha, and then the other guy says, my dad was an Ustasha too, and this is why they treat us like shit, like we always get the worst jobs because our dads were Ustashas. And so Braća says like how his dad was killed by the partisans, and the other guy says, my dad was killed by the Chetniks, which also, I think, has this subtle way, like, role of portraying Chetniks as the other anti-fascist.
The other anti-fascist, yeah. Instead of the wait around in Ravnogora waiting for fascist orders.
And so, Braća's also hatching a plan to, like, escape with his love interest, who, like, and that doesn't work out because the army decides to send him to train dogs.
Yeah.
And that, like, marks him for the rest of his life. He's like, when you work with dogs, you have to, like, be on their level or something. And I don't know, it's some sort of, I guess, you're losing your humanity because you have to just, be on the level of the dogs.
Yeah, and I didn't quite understand what was the point of all that, but yeah.
Yeah, me neither. But so then that foils his plot to escape with his love interest because it means he's not going to be in the barracks anymore that are close enough to like a border to escape. Instead, he's being sent from border to border to take dogs and train them with like army units. Mm-hmm. But then we discover he does eventually escape, and of course goes to Austria and links up with radical emigres, as one does. And we don't really see how that it plays out in a kind of silly way in some way, no? Like, so the next thing we see that again establishes kind of this ideological point of Croats are all into being nationalist Croats.
Yeah.
Is when all the mother's character finally gets money paid out from the dad's pension, from the late partisan father's pension, and it's very difficult and traumatic for her, but she decides to improve their material conditions and build a new house.
I have to say though, it was unclear to me why, because you're talking about the scene where the guy starts putting money in her hand, and as she begins to sort of cry, the money slides off her hand onto the ground because there's so much of it, like this one.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was unclear to me why she was crying. I was also kind of wondering.
Because she never collected his pensions because presumably it was like a painful thing for her.
Yeah, but I also wondered if this was also because this the next moment she's like smiling and helping to build her house. So I kind of also wondered if this was like a liberating moment as well. It's the first time she had her own property.
I mean, it is. Like I said, she decides to use it to, improve the family and build this house. And so there's this scene where she's, they're building this house, all the local, all of her late husband's family are with them, helping them construct this house. And then they hear all these, they see all these buses going to the next village and singing songs.
So this is now 1971.
1971. Uh-huh. Yeah. And they're like, oh, what's going on there? And they see a flyer. They get a flyer that the people are throwing out of the, motorcade and or whatever. And it's like this pro-Croatian that they're establishing in the next village over where the Ustashas had been previously, a new, what's it called? Croatian culture house or something. Cultural center or whatever.
So this is the portrayal of what we mentioned before, which is the Croatian Spring.
Yeah.
The kind of more, we call it more civic Croatian nationalist movement that happened in 71, which was led by the Croatian Communist Party and demanded more autonomy for Croatia inside of Yugoslavia. And but this film portrays it as the Ustashas are back. And there is they show their kind of event by this in the next village, the gathering, and people are giving speeches, and the speeches are straight up Nazi speeches. They're the guy he's talking how Croats are Aryans and stuff like that, which is not. I mean, in 1971 in Yugoslavia, you wouldn't have like public events with people talking about how the Croats are actually Aryans, and like it's basically an Ustaša event, which is like, and so
it's like conflating the Croatian Spring, though. Am I wrong with Ustaša? Is this the idea?
Yes. I mean, the whole idea is, all Croats are Ustašas. Like, that's the thing. And it's inevitable. It will always happen. Like, if you live with them, this thing will always happen, And this is like, so one of the TV movies we reviewed, the last one, the Empty Space, or whatever we call it.
Out in the open.
Out maybe? In the open, yeah.
Yeah.
That is like happening in 1972. And we made a point, like, so these Ustašas came a year after the Croatian Spring, thinking what this film is telling us is happening. All of these Ustašas ready for us in Yugoslavia, and got fucked over. Like, no one supported them. Everyone snitched them to the cops, and like they had like it was a disaster of a campaign they had because people were not pro Ustaša. But this film tells us that they were.
The exact opposite. And 3 years later, when it was made, which is a pretty significant difference. And of course, so like, little Vesalian witnesses this. He actually is the one that goes to the village. He's supposed to be, he's a young boy, like probably like 9 years old or something at the time. And, so he goes with his friend and they witness this. And then this is also when we find out that like what kind of emigre activities Braća was into as well, right? So he actually gets sent back. And I think this is also kind of a subtle reference maybe to the Bugojno group, no? Like he gets sent back at this particular time to kind of stir up trouble. And they do this by lighting the mountain on fire. And of course, he's a little bit hesitant to do so because it's his home area. Like he wants to kind of see his mother and stuff.
Yeah.
He ultimately like goes through with it. Again, he's driving in a Mercedes. They also gotta have the sign that somebody's coming from Western
coming
Europe.
Home.
They're coming in Mercedes and stirring up shit. And at that point, like there's a point on the road where the two brothers pass each other, but they don't know. They don't know who they are, right? But as a result of this, like this activity in the neighboring village, like the mother's in-laws completely turn on her. They're like, you're an Ustaša, basically. They start throwing bottles at the house that they're helping her build. And then she's kind of left to do it on her own, with just help with the immediate family. And then she dies in a very kind of odd death.
Yeah.
Where she's like working a cement mixer and gets electrocuted.
Right.
But this is also later too. It jumps like down the timeline.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Because at this point, Vesalian's already more or less like a young adult.
Yeah.
And
but she says to him in that scene, today, like it's been 5 years since we started like building our house or something like this. So this process was going on for 5 years. So maybe I guess they're telling us this is 5 years later or something like that.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess then he would have been, because he looks the same age as he is at the end of the film, right? So like I guess.
Well, I'm telling you, he's the Freddie Highmore of Yugoslavia,
and now he's 15 or something. But yeah, her character dies in like she gets electrocuted, but you can't tell that's what's happening at first. She just kind of like starts screaming and then just falls over dead, and they're like, "Oh no, mom's been electrocuted. She's been struck dead by electricity." Kind of a strange.
Well, they run across and he tries to get her relatives to come over, and he comes over and pokes her with a stick. Yeah,
but the relatives also portrayed as like he is like
he's a terrible
horrible,
guy.
Like abusive alcoholic.
Yeah. Constantly like hitting his wife, dragging her around. But he says, "I'm no Nikola Tesla."
Yeah.
He pokes her.
But he's a communist cop, so he's the most like negative Serbian character. But the point is made that he's a Serbian cop. But still, like even the war, like so when her relatives and neighbors who are trying like helping her build a house, when they see the Croatian Spring thing going on, they kind of become assholes towards her and like, you're a Croat, you're probably you're one of them and so on, and they like bully her. But later on, they're like again nice to her, even the Croatian, even the Serbian communist cop guy is like helping her build a house, even though he is an asshole. But there is a difference between how he is portrayed and the Ustashas are. Like he's a horrible guy, but he's still helping her, like in some significant way.
Yeah, he's also kind of like he's a violent alcoholic, but like just kind of an idiot redneck, basically. Is kind of how they portray him. Yeah. Like he listens to like epic folk poetry on his radio and blasts
shouts it
while
out.
he like beats his wife and drinks heavily.
Yeah. I think this is also the kind of way that Serbian nationalists want to portray these Serbo-Croat relations. Is that Serbs are were honestly open to the whole Yugoslav thing, but then Croats would always fuck them over. So Serbs get mad and like, you're Ustashas, but then later on they're like, I guess you're okay or something like that. Because they're such nice, open, good-hearted people.
Yeah, but then, so like with the death of his mother, Veselin is sent to a home, and that's like decided basically by his extended family. And then he gets into trouble as a youth. You see him like on a school excursion with his two friends, and they're like acting crazy and jumping in the river and running around, and getting yelled at by their teacher.
That's an excursion. I mean, that's just an excursion.
That's
a light one. I used to know some teachers over there who told me some horror stories about excursions.
Yeah. The teacher, by the way, is played by Bogdan Diklic, who was one of the stars of the last series that we did.
Yeah.
That's his little appearance there. And I guess, they run away from the excursion. They go back to their home, to his home village with his friends from the city. And, he just sees kind of his alcoholic uncle and how horrible it is. They go back to the city and he murders a man at his prom.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like, that's just his character arc there.
Yeah.
That sums it up.
And I mean, mostly you described also the character arc of his Ustasha brother.
Yeah.
Except what happens at the very end.
Right. So they continue to exchange these tapes and also letters, and they send each other photographs of one another. And Veselin puts like a picture of his half brother in his cell. And then his half brother's also just like kind of overwhelmed by everything.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, I'm going to have to destroy these pictures and these tapes and all this kind of stuff. Like, can we actually be brothers? And then the film ends with him coming back to Yugoslavia and meeting his half-brother in prison, in the prison.
Yeah, but that's because, like, when his German or Austrian boss tells him, like, he sees that Braća is depressed or whatever, and then he tells him something, this, what you're doing is not good. Every man needs its home country and a family. And then Braća is thinking, and the next scene is, we see the younger brother Veselin kind of depressively walking in a circle in a prison, and someone calls his name, and he turns around and he sees for the first time his brother, who is now in prison. Like, so basically he turned himself in and will serve his sentence as an Ustasha terrorist or whatever in Yugoslavia, and spend time with his brother in prison.
In order to have that feeling of being home, is that the implication? That's why he turned himself in? I
think basically that scene is almost kind of like a fantasy dream scene. Like it could be something imagined. I mean, I don't think that's the intention, but it's almost, I think also ideologically it serves like this, Serbs and Croats could be brothers, but only if Croats totally like repented and like rejected all their ideology, make the ultimate sacrifice and went to prison. It's basically impossible. Like,
yeah.
I mean, it happens in this film, but it's like, I guess, an exception, I would say. Like, it doesn't have much, like, the film functions without that. They're just like kind of a interesting, corny, emotional end to it, but it doesn't really have much effect to the rest of it.
Probably something that they somewhat had to do for political reasons anyway. Like, you couldn't have it be resolved any other way, right? They have to in some way show that they can be brothers, even if it's very unlikely.
Yeah.
And it does have a very dreamlike quality to it, because like when they're in the yard and they embrace, they repeat the shot like 4 different times from several different angles.
Yes, it was the first like fucking action sequence of a hug I've ever seen. And that was kind of fun. Multi-angle, one of them's in slow motion.
Yeah. And they embrace, and then that's it. The film's over.
That's the film. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is like... so this film was directed by Zdravko Šotra, who is a kind of a well-known director in Serbia, but mostly like he doesn't have a great reputation. He like directs kind of films that are considered trashy and like always heavily produced by the state and supported by the government. And I think he made his name in that sense with this film. As we mentioned, so this is the time when, Slobodan Milošević was the new leader in Serbia. His regime was a new one, and it's at this point existed inside of Yugoslavia, but very capitalized on, propagating Serbian nationalist ideas. And this, I think, film was very important in that ideological sense. It's framing Serbian ideology of the 90s in regards to Serbs in Croatia. And next year, Zdravko Šotra got to make this film called, The Battle of Kosovo, Mojna Kosovo, which is this kind of famously bad, bad in terms of like the production of the film. So it depicts the 1389 battle in Kosovo, but like from this kind of mythological, not historical point of view.
It's crazy to look at. Also, it's a strange film.
Yes. So both films were produced by Belgrade Television, which means by the Milošević regime, and they served an important ideological function in the new nationalist movement in Serbia. Obviously, Milošević came into power on the Kosovo issue, and the Battle of Kosovo had an important role in that. The film, I think, and this one, as I said, to the Croatian issue, because what is because 3 years later, the war started in Croatia, and the local Serbian nationalists managed to organize the local population into this separatist state, which was totally supported by the Serbia's state security, like that we mentioned. I mean, we went to Radio Warner to talk about Serbian Red Berets, and we talked in detail about how this happened. But a lot of these people, Serbs in Croatia, had to be pushed into such an ideology because this was not the traditional Serbian politics in Croatia.
Right.
Like Serbs in Croatia didn't have these separatist ideas. They very much identified with Croatia. They had their own Serbian identity, but it was a specific identity of Serbs from Croatia. And they always had close relations with parts of the more kind of liberal Croatian political establishment, and were later with those people in the partisan movement and in the Communist Party and so on. And, and also this whole idea of having a Serbian state inside of Croatia or kind of a homogeneous Serbian territory there is doesn't make any sense really, because, Knin, which is the main town in this area that this film is going on, was not like the center of Serbs in Croatia. Zagreb was, you cannot really fully, realize the interests of Serbs in Croatia by separating, from Croatia. It kind of didn't make sense, that politics in 91. But this film is totally ideologically, it sets the ideology for such a thing, because it says, you cannot live with these people together in the same society. They will inevitably turn on you in this kind of Ustasha way. It always happens. And even the ones who are good people will go along with this anti-Serbian pro-Ustasha ideology. So this is not surprising. So I mentioned who the director is and what his trajectory was. But the guy who wrote the script and also the novel that the film is based on is even more interesting. He's a guy called Jovan Radulović, and he's from that area. He's a Serb from Croatia, from the Knin area. And in 91, apparently, he became a government minister in this Serbian breakaway state. The Republic of Serbian Krajina. Only briefly he was a minister during 91. After that, he wasn't. But still, he was very personally, at least according to Croatian Wikipedia, aligned with this, the nationalist politics of the 90s there in a very direct way. And had like this kind of anti-communist background because allegedly, like because of some drama that he wrote, like that was performed theatrically in the early 80s, at least according to him and his supporters, he had some like repercussions in the Yugoslavia, like by the like they were kind of they frame it like he was suppressed somehow by the communists because and was accused of Serbian nationalism in the early 80s because of this theatrical play that he wrote. But I mean, I didn't see any evidence that he was like severely repressed. I mean, the play was performed,
right?
And he had a career as a writer. But he had already this idea in the 80s. How Serbs are repressed, and he's being accused of being a Serbian nationalist for no reason, and so on. So yeah.
I mean, the director's the fact that he made the Battle of Kosovo film, I think is an important tidbit to add. It is a like fantastically terrible film.
Yes,
we should maybe watch it one day. It's
absolutely watch that.
It's really like B movie level film, but that had a disproportionate amount of influence somehow for being such a crappy film. Like songs from that film are sung by
the Red Berets.
By the Red Berets, yeah.
That is disturbing.
The song that was made for that film became the official anthem of the Red Berets.
Oh, that's not good.
Which is, the Serbian state security paramilitary, which they probably thought that's some kind of authentic medieval Serbian song or something.
Yeah. It's directly from this crappy B movie and was used by the,
Oh, that's amazing.
The armed wing of state security. Their special forces units. So I mean,
and they were the people who pushed Serbs of Croatia into war. So they were like some in the TENE area. They were more, as I said, these people who were aligned with Serbian nationalism. But in other areas, you had to severely push people into being ready for war. So they would basically come to some villages and forcefully arm people, and then they would attack Croatian military or police base and leave. The Red Berets would, so leave the local Serbs to suffer the repercussions of the Croat forces. Yeah. So and so it's kind of interesting that the people who later put into force this ideology that this movie sets also has this other have this other connection with this director in the sense that they adopted a song from his movie as their official.
Yeah.
So it's
now he actually kind of backpedals on some of this later on, because obviously that's probably the most important movie in his career. I mean, he goes on to make movies that are both popular and have and are considered to be okay films. But it's definitely the Battle of Kosovo film is the most kind of important in his filmography. And I read in some interviews that he gave later on in the last few decades where he's like, well, okay, but Milosevic didn't order me to make that film. It wasn't directed in that way, but there are kind of a lot of coincidences there that don't seem to add up any other way.
Well,
and I think now he's, he's like a liberal or something, from what I understand.
Okay. He probably he later made more kind of lighthearted films. I think he was kind of sick of this kind of stuff. But he definitely served a very important ideological political function at a crucial period for the Milosevic regime.
Yeah. So I mean, this is, like we said, very different from the other two. But not difficult to watch, I gotta say.
Especially because it's not
strange.
5 hours long. Yeah.
It's not 5 hours long. It's a little strange in the way that the storytelling works and kind of the whole vibe of the film. But the actors are pretty good. It's not a bad film to watch. Unfortunately, there's no subtitled versions that I know of.
Yeah.
So for the listener at home, you're going to be watching it anytime soon.
All right. Well, free listeners, that's what you get. Sad story. Couple of brothers, up to no good, started making trouble in their neighborhood. But, you know,
one little fight and the war got started.
War got started, and you said you're moving with your auntie and uncle to the lower Mutalic. Anyway, we got some good stuff coming up. We got Sopos coming back for one last final hurrah. For one big blowout party, the Serbian National Defense. Right? Is that SOPO?
No.
God damn it. Which one does SOPO stand for? Serbia Defense.
Serbian the Defense Movement Fatherland.
Right.
Although they had a different name in English. Completely different.
Yeah.
But the Serbian National Defense is closely connected to it because they grew out of that organization.
Well, this is why you got to bring it back. You know, can't mix up my SOPOs and my SNDs and all that.
It's been a while.
Keep it proper.
We're going back to that. We're going to connect it to the organized crime stuff.
Yes,
and on that. But in that way, we will tease what will come in one of the next arcs
in the distant future.
Yes, because this organized crime connection connects it to the 90s and the war and the paramilitaries and so on.
And we know that's why y'all are actually here. But you know, as soon as we start doing that season, everybody's gone. And where's our money, baby? That's it. We gotta hold on to the absolute last minute.
In the distant future, yeah.
Yes. That's right.
But yeah, we're gonna get to meet Bosko, aka Yugo, and a bunch of other colorful characters.
Hell yes. That's awesome. All right, guys, cool.
Bosko was featured on another podcast.
Who's stepping on our territory?
That would be the Sammy the Bulls podcast.
Well, okay, fair enough.
Say we should send out the Goon Squad, but
they can keep trying to corner
with Sammy the Bull there.
The mom has a few podcasts now. Yeah.
Sammy the Bull's actually I've watched some of his interviews. I don't think I've listened to the podcast, but it's quite entertaining. If I remember.
Yeah. I mean, it's pretty crazy. Yeah,
he gets in that fight with that other ex-mafia guy.
Yeah.
He's like, "Yo, fucking snitch! What the fuck do I have to listen to you for?"
Yeah. Sammy the Bull thinks that Bosko was crazy and nuts.
Yeah, that says a lot. That's who's coming up. Yep. Mm-hmm. And we're gonna finish up our Q&A with our patrons, and then we're on to something weird.
Yeah.
Old Fritz has something brewing up here in the head pot. It's boiling.
Well, keep it at a low simmer
until my brains get super soft.
We don't want you boiling it over anytime soon.
Alrighty, guys. So I will see you then.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye. Hey there, Fritz here from The Empire Never Ended. This has been one of our weekly free episodes for free people. But for premium people, we also have weekly premium episodes, which you can get at patreon.com/tenepod, TENEPOD, and also follow our various social media things in the show description there. Like and subscribe them. Follow them. Like and follow and subscribe. Follow them. Do it.